Good evening, everyone. I am Garcia Vinis Jesame, and I'm here for today to tackle about Module 9 Gestalt Psychology. So, do you have any ideas about Gestalt Psychology? So, I guess you don't have any ideas, so let's start our discussion. This is objectives. So, in this module, challenge yourself to attain the following learning outcomes. So, first, describe the different Gestalt principles. Second, list ways of applying Gestalt psychology in teaching learning process. Third, demonstrate appreciation of the usefulness of Gestalt principles in the teaching learning process. So let's define Gestalt first. So what is Gestalt? So Gestalt is a physical, biological, or symbolic configuration or pattern of elements so unified as a whole that its properties cannot be identified from a simple summation of its parts. So Gestalt psychology was at the forefront of the cognitive psychology. It serves as the foundation of the cognitive perspective to learning. It opposed the external and mechanistic focus of behaviorism. It considered the mental processes and the product of perception. From my own perspective, Gestalt psychology is a school of thought that looks at the human mind and behavior as a whole. When trying to make sense of the world around us, Gestalt psychology suggests that we do not simply focus on every component. Instead, our mind tends to perceive objects as a part of greater whole and as elements of more complex systems. So this school of psychology played a major role in the modern development of study of human sensation and perception. Who discovered the Gestalt theory? So first is Wolfgang Köhler, second Kurt Kufka, and third Max Wertheimer. So these three German psychologists introduced the Gestalt theory and the Gestalt principles. Gestalt theory was initial cognitive response to behaviorism. It emphasized the importance of sensory wholes and the dynamic nature of visual perception. The term Gestalt means form or configuration. Psychologists Max Wertheimer, Wolfgang Köhler, and Kurt Kufka studied perception and concluded that perceivers or learners are not passive but rather active. They suggested that learners do not just collect information as if, but they actively process and restructure data to understand it, and this is what we call perceptual process. Factors like past experiences, needs, attitudes, and one's present situation can affect their perception. So according to Gestalt psychologists, the way we form our perceptions are guided by a certain principles or laws. So there are 6 Gestalt principles. The first Gestalt principle is the law of proximity. Elements that are closer together will be perceived as coherent objects. As you can see in the picture, on the left, there are 6 horizontal lines, while on the right, there are 6 columns. So when objects we are perceiving are near each other, we perceive this as belonging together. The next is the second Gestalt principle, which is the law of similarity. As you can see on the picture, elements that look similar will be perceived as part of the same form. Again, as you can see in the picture, there seems to be diamond form in the square, and that we link similar elements together. So next is the third principle, which is the law of closure. So we tend to fill the gaps or close the figure we perceive. We enclose a space by completing a contour and ignoring gaps in the figure. Next is the fourth Gestalt principle, which is the law of good continuation. Individuals have the tendency to continue contours whenever the elements of the pattern establish an implied direction. So as you can see on the picture, there are 2 arrows up and down. So people tend to draw a good continuous line. So next is the fifth principle, which is the law of figure or ground. So we tend to pay attention and perceive things in the foreground first. A stimulus will be perceived as separate from its ground. And lastly, the sixth Gestalt principle, which is the law of good pregnance. So the stimulus will be organized into as a good figure as possible. In this example, good refers to symmetry, simplicity, and regularity. The figure is perceived as a square overlapping a triangle, not a combination of several complicated shapes. Next is the insight learning. Gestalt psychology adheres to the idea of learning taking place by discovery or insight. The idea of insight learning was first developed by Wolfgang Kohler, in which he described experiments with apes, where the apes could use boxes and sticks as tools to solve problems. In a box of a problem, a banana is attached at the top of chimpanzee's cage. So the banana is out of reach but can be reached by climbing on or jumping from a box. However, Kohler's ape, who is Sultan, was very intelligent ape and was able to master a two-stick problem by inserting one stick into the end of the other in order to reach the food. In each of these problems, the important aspect of learning was not reinforcement, but coordination of thinking to create new organizations of materials. Kohler referred to this behavior as insight or discovery of learning. So Kohler proposed the view that insight follows from characteristics of objects under consideration. So his theory suggested that learning could occur when the individual perceives the relationship of the elements before him and reorganizes these elements and come to a greater understanding or insight. So this could occur without reinforcement, and it occurs no review, training, or investigation is necessary. Next is the Gestalt principles and the teaching learning process. So the six Gestalt principles not only influence perception, but they also impact on learning. Other psychologists like Kurt Lewin expanded on Gestalt psychology. So his theory, focusing on life's phase, adhered to Gestalt psychology. He said that even an individual has inner and outer forces that affect his perception and also his learning. Inner forces include his own motivation, attitudes, and feelings. On the other hand, outer forces may include the attitude and the behavior of the teachers and classmates. All of these factors interact and impact on the person's learning. Mario Polito, an Italian psychologist, writes about the relevance of Gestalt psychology to education.
Looking at this, what's the first thing you see? Do you see a bicycle? Or do you see handlebars, pedals, spokes, tires, brakes, a seat, and a frame? If you're human, I'm guessing you saw a bike. This idea that we make sense of things by seeing a whole rather than the individual parts is called Gestalt psychology, and its principles are especially important for designers in creating complete and compelling visuals. Because of psychologists Max Wertheimer, Kurt Koffka, and Wolfgang Kohler, Gestalt theory can be broken down into 6 design principles. Figure ground. The thought that when we look at a scene, we separate objects so that some are the focus or figure and others are the background. Similarity. The notion that we place objects with similar characteristics in a group. These characteristics can include color, size, font, shape, texture, and more. Proximity. The belief that we group together objects that are close to each other. Closure. The idea that our minds close objects that are not necessarily together or complete in order to create a whole. Continuity. The theory that we continue to follow objects that are visually aligned until they are interrupted. Order. The belief that alignment and symmetry are attractive and essential elements of design. When Gestalt principles are ignored, designs tend to look out of place or incomplete, forcing our eyes to focus on little